There was probably a moment that looked completely ordinary from the outside. A message, maybe short, maybe even friendly in its wording. And you read it, and something in your chest moved before your brain finished processing the words. Not fear, exactly. More like a door closing somewhere inside you. Quietly. Without announcement. You put the phone down, picked it up again, read it one more time. Nothing was technically wrong with what they said. That's the part that made it worse. You've sat in a car after a conversation like that, right? Hands still on the wheel, the engine off, and you're just sitting there, trying to figure out what happened. Because the conversation ended, everyone smiled, nobody said anything cruel, and still, you drove away feeling like something had been taken. That feeling, that specific, slightly airless feeling in the upper chest, the one that arrives before the explanation does. That's where this starts. Not with a villain, not with a betrayal you can point to, with a feeling you couldn't quite name that you've been living with for longer than you want to admit. And here's what I want to say before anything else. You were not crazy for feeling it. You were not too sensitive. You were not making something out of nothing. You were paying attention. And part of you had already started keeping score. The first thing most people do with that feeling is apologize to themselves for having it. Maybe I'm reading into things. Maybe they're just tired. Maybe this is about something they're going through, and I'm making it about me. Maybe I need to be more patient. Maybe I need to be clearer. Maybe I need to stop being so reactive. You go through the whole list. And every single item on that list is aimed at you. It becomes a habit so fast, you barely notice it happening. Something feels off, and your first instinct is to find the way it was your fault. Because that's the version that hurts less in the short term. If it's your fault, you can fix it. You can explain better, try harder, choose different words, give it more time. But when the other version is true, when the thing that's wrong is not something you did, but something you keep sensing underneath what they do, you can't fix that. And not being able to fix it terrifies you in a way that's hard to describe. So you explain it away. Again. And you're good at it. You've had practice. You're not a bad person for having done this. You were trying to survive the confusion while also keeping something you cared about intact. That's not weakness. That's just what people do when they love someone and the story keeps not adding up. But I want you to sit with something for a second. The number of times you've talked yourself out of what you felt. The number of times you've landed on, maybe I'm overthinking, as the final answer. How many times has that actually been true? How many times did you explain it away and then, weeks or months later, find out the thing you were sensing was real? Your track record with your own gut might be better than you've given yourself credit for. Let me tell you what the pattern actually looks like, because it's rarely what you'd see in a movie. It doesn't come with obvious cruelty. It doesn't show up as someone calling you names or throwing things. That would be easier in a strange way. Easier to name, easier to leave. What it usually looks like is this. They're warm when they need something from you. Not performing warmth, exactly. Something that feels real enough to confuse you. And then, when you need something, when you ask for clarity or consistency or just a straight answer, the temperature drops. Not dramatically, just They get a little distant, a little quieter, or they change the subject in a way that's almost undetectable. They apologize, sometimes genuinely, in the moment, but the thing they apologized for, it shows up again next month. Same shape, different occasion. They ask how you're doing, but the way they listen, you can feel them waiting for you to finish so the conversation can go somewhere else. They say, "I care about you," and the words are true enough, but the energy underneath them is control. What they really mean, even if they don't know it themselves, is, "I care about you when you're easy, when you need things, when you push back, when you exist in ways that inconvenience the version of me I'm trying to maintain." That's when things get cold. And publicly, they're fine, more than fine, considerate even. People like them. People would be confused if you tried to explain what I just described. That's the thing about this kind of dynamic. It doesn't leave marks anyone else can see. They soften only when they sense you leaving. Right when you're about to pull back, the warmth comes back. The apology arrives. The conversation gets good again. And you think, okay, maybe it's going to be different. Maybe they heard me. But they didn't change. They just recalibrated. They adjusted the pressure just enough to keep you in place. Some people never say they want control. They just make peace feel impossible unless you're obeying their mood. I want to slow down here for a second, because this is the part I think gets skipped too fast. There's a version of this story that goes, "You were naive. They were manipulative. You woke up. Good for you." That's clean. That's satisfying. And it's also not quite true. Because the part of you that stayed, the part that kept trying, kept wanting to believe the good moments were the real ones, that part was not stupid. You remember a version of them that felt real. Maybe it was real. Maybe there were genuinely good days. Maybe they showed you something that mattered, and you built a whole architecture of hope around it. Not because you were gullible, but because that's what human beings do when they care about someone. You didn't want to start over. That's fair. Starting over is exhausting and frightening in a way people who've never had to do it don't understand. You were afraid that if you admitted it, if you really let yourself see it clearly, then all the time you'd already spent would mean something different. All those nights you stayed up working on the relationship, or on yourself, or on understanding them, it would all be reclassified as time you spent in something that was never going to work. That's a hard thing to face. Grief dressed up as confusion is still grief. So you stayed a little longer. You gave one more chance. You told yourself the next version of the conversation would be the one that finally made things make sense. The part of you that held on was not holding on out of stupidity. It was holding on because it still believed, somewhere underneath everything, that love was supposed to be a place you could rest. That if you just explained yourself well enough, if you just found the right words, the safety you were looking for would finally appear. You were wrong about whether it was coming, but you weren't wrong to want it. Let me say that again differently. The longing was never the problem. The longing was just love, trying to find a place to land. Your body knew longer than your mind wanted to admit. Think about how tired you were after certain conversations. Not tired like you'd done a lot of work, tired in a specific way, like something had been quietly drained. You'd sit down afterwards and feel hollow in a way you couldn't explain. or the way your shoulders would tighten when their name came up on your phone. Not because anything had happened yet, just the name. The anticipation of having to manage whatever the next interaction would require of you. Or how on the days they didn't reach out, there was sometimes this strange, almost guilty sense of relief. And you'd push it down fast, because what kind of person feels relieved when someone they care about is quiet? But that relief was information. It was your nervous system telling you something your narrative was still protecting. Your body had been taking notes. Long before you had words for any of this, long before you were ready to say it out loud, your body was sitting at a small table somewhere inside you, writing things down. The tension before the call. The way you mentally rehearsed what you were going to say before saying it. How you chose words based on which version of them you might be dealing with that day. How you'd done this so many times it felt normal, but it was never actually normal. That's not being in a relationship with someone. That's being in a weather system. I'm not saying your body is always right. I'm saying that when the same signal shows up over and over, across months, across different situations, across different conversations that end the same tired way, that's not paranoia. That's a pattern. And patterns, even invisible ones, leave evidence. You weren't imagining things. You were just slower to believe yourself than your body was. And then there's this moment. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. You don't send a long message. You don't write the speech you'd rehearsed in your head for 6 months. You don't do the confrontation, or the tearful phone call, or the ultimatum. You just don't reply right away. Or you do reply, but you don't explain yourself this time. You don't soften the edges. You don't add the extra sentence that makes sure they feel okay about what you just said. You stop volunteering for the wound. That's it. That's the move. It's quiet. It's almost embarrassingly small looking from the outside. There's no scene, no moment anyone would put in a movie. But something inside you is different, and you feel it immediately. You stop trying to make them understand what they did, because you realize, somewhere in the middle of your third or fourth attempt to explain it, that understanding was never what they were withholding. They understood. They just hadn't decided it mattered enough to change. You stop apologizing to keep the peace, when the peace was never real to begin with. You stop revisiting the conversation in your head at 2 in the morning, trying to find the version of events where you said it better and they heard you differently. You did not announce the ending. You just stopped putting yourself in the same position and expecting a different result. This is not revenge. It carries zero heat. It's just a decision that lives quietly inside you, taking up very little space, requiring almost no performance. The decision is, I am done asking this person to confirm what I already know is true. Something shifts after that. It's not immediate. The first few days, you're still checking your phone more than you'd like to admit. Still catching yourself rehearsing conversations that aren't happening. Still bracing for the text that isn't coming, or bracing for the one that is. But then, slowly, some things get quieter. You sleep a little more completely. You wake up and the first thought isn't about them. And you notice that, and it feels like finding money in a coat you forgot you owned. You eat breakfast, and it's just breakfast. You have a thought, and you don't immediately measure it against what they'd think of it. You stop bracing. That's the word. The constant low-grade bracing you'd been doing, the way you'd been holding yourself slightly tense in anticipation of the next mood, the next shift, the next thing to navigate. That starts to release, slowly, in pieces. And you start hearing yourself again. Your own preferences, your own sense of what feels right in a situation. You'd been running so much of your inner life through the filter of how it would land with them that you'd kind of forgotten what your unmediated opinions even were. You also notice something strange. You don't need them to admit it anymore. You thought you did. You were so sure that the only way you'd be able to move forward was if they acknowledged what happened. If they said, "Yes, I did that. I knew what I was doing. I'm sorry." But that confession never comes from people like this. And the peace you thought required it turned out to be available without it. You get your clarity not from their admission, but from the quiet that grows in the space where their noise used to live. I've been thinking about what to call what happened, the whole arc of it. Not the betrayal. I don't even want to use that word. It's too cinematic for something that was mostly quiet. More like a slow accumulation. A long, low-grade weight that you carried around so long, you stopped noticing how heavy it had gotten. And I keep coming back to this. Maybe the confusion itself was a kind of mercy. Not the kind anyone would choose, but the kind that, looking back, you can see the shape of. Because while you were confused, while you were trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't, you were also, without planning it, being separated from something that was keeping you small. Maybe God doesn't always remove the thing that's hurting you all at once. Maybe sometimes what happens is you get moved away from it gradually, through your own growing exhaustion, through your own accumulating evidence, through the quiet refusal of your body to keep absorbing what your mind was still trying to excuse. Maybe the mercy was not in the pain being taken away, but in you finally getting so tired of the confusion that you stopped participating in it. He was not asking you to hate them. I don't think that was ever the assignment. He was asking you to stop disappearing inside a relationship that kept making you smaller. He was asking you to stop treating your own peace like it was negotiable. He was asking you to come back to yourself, and he knew you wouldn't do it until you were ready. So he let the evidence accumulate until you were. And the thing you thought was absence, the thing that felt like being overlooked, being passed over, being left to figure it out alone, it was actually the opposite. You were not left alone. You were returned to yourself. Slowly, with more care than it felt like at the time. You were never the mistake. You were never the problem to be solved. You were just someone who needed to be called back home. And home had always been inside you, waiting. I want to close this simply. You don't need to move fast. Whatever comes next, you don't have to do it dramatically or loudly or with any kind of performance for anyone watching. You're allowed to leave slowly. You're allowed to leave without a confrontation. You're allowed to let things quietly shift without announcing the shift to anyone, including them. You don't need to hate them to trust your own experience of what happened. Those two things are separate. You can look back at someone with a kind of sad, clear understanding without needing to burn anything down. You don't need perfect evidence. You don't need a confession, a witness, a documented record. You need your own repeated experience of the same feeling in the same kinds of situations with this same person. That's enough. It was always enough. And if any part of you is still calling what you felt overthinking, I want you to reconsider that word. Because overthinking implies your mind went to a place the evidence didn't warrant. But if the evidence kept arriving, if the feeling kept returning, if the pattern kept showing up in slightly different clothes, that's not overthinking, that's noticing. And noticing is not the same as being wrong. You're allowed to trust what you kept feeling, even when you couldn't prove it. You're allowed to choose the version of your life where you're not managing someone else's weather all the time. You're allowed to choose your peace. If this reached something in you today, leave a comment, something small. Just mark it for yourself. I trust what I felt, or I'm done translating myself, or even just, my peace already knew. Say it for yourself, not for anyone else. If you want more conversations that go this deep without the noise, subscribe. I don't shout. I just try to say the thing that's hard to say out loud. And if someone in your life is going through this right now, calling themselves oversensitive, calling themselves dramatic, still trying to explain their gut feelings to someone who's already decided not to hear them, share this with that person. Sometimes what we need to hear is just, "You're not making it up." May you stop calling your intuition a problem just because it noticed what your heart was not ready to name. That's all. Go rest now.